so green.
What's in the basket? Easter eggs?
It was an experiment that tampered with nature's most basic laws. It went terribly wrong.
There's this thing growing inside of me. It's not my baby.
Couvert de gargouilles immondes, toutes ces formes.
You okay?
If you love me, if you love me, then it's fire!
What's going on?
Bill, there's nothing to worry about. Everything's going to be just fine.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in our 6th series exploring the mind and body in horror cinema, and this is part 31. As we near the end of the series this week, it's going to be a little also-rans episode. We're going to be recommending other films that we haven't had time or we haven't had a chance to discuss in depth throughout the series. So this episode will be completely spoiler free. We will just be bringing you a series of recommendations. Get ready to jot down some of these titles though, because there are some absolute gems that we're going to be recommending to you. Now, usually we just have one episode like this per season, but because this is such a big series, it's such a sprawling series, and it's such a kind of wide, vague subgenre, we're splitting it into 2. So in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be bringing you a psychological kind of mind horror also-rans. This week is going to be purely body horror. So a particularly useful recommendations for all of you body horror and gore fans out there. Not only that, just a quick mention to say later on in this episode, I'm going to be joined very briefly by none other than friend of the pod, very good friend of mine, Zobo with a Shotgun, who's got some very exciting announcements about a brand new horror project that she has unveiled this month called Ghouls Magazine, and she'll be giving you a little bit more information about that and some very exciting upcoming events very soon. But for now, let's begin our list of body horror also-rans recommendations. Joining me to discuss all things body horror, a long-time friend of the pod. He is a producer for Queensbury Pictures. He recently produced a really interesting horror movie called Girl on the Third Floor, and he's got some other exciting projects coming up this year as well. He's a massive film fan, and he's also pretty much seen every movie ever made, so he's perfect for this particular job. Welcome back to the podcast, Giles Edwards. Hello.
Hey man, how are you?
I am all right, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, same as everyone. Not much of a story to tell. The inside of my 4 walls are great.
Yeah.
You know, as all the parents out there will understand, homeschooling is a horror film in itself.
I can imagine. So, Giles, let me ask you before we kick off, body horror. Are you a fan of the subgenre in general?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Brian De Palma and David Cronenberg are probably my 2 favourite, you know, kind of
nice
grown-up genre filmmakers. You know, especially, I guess, the first half of Cronenberg's career before he went a little bit more cerebral.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of, to me, is the epitome of proper grown-up horror, where it's kind of horror of ideas, but it's still, you know, there is the horror of Rosemary's Babies and Repulsion and Eyes Without Face and the very kind of artistically minded stuff, which I love. And then there's there's Friday the 13th and Bad Taste and that kind of side of things as well. And kind of Cronenberg seems to mash all that kind of stuff. It's very, very high-minded, philosophical and intelligentsia, but also he's putting a baboon in a teleporter and making it, you know, kind of turn into mush, which is, you know, and not having any qualms about that, doing completely straight-faced, just going, yeah, this is horrible. And that's kind of what we are, you know, so that has always been kind of, I think he was a kind of a core filmmaker kind of for me growing up. And then, you know, discovering Frank Henenlotter and Peter Jackson and all the other stuff rolling off for it. I mean, I'm a Fango kid from back in the day, and the makeup effects guys were always my favourite. So, you know, Screaming Mad George kind of shunting someone at the end of society is like, yeah, man, that's that's my formative memories for good or for ill.
So good, isn't it? So good. And actually, I guess there are, and we'll probably see this as we go through some of these films, that there are different types of body horrors as well, aren't there? Like you said, there is the sort of Cronenberg stuff, there's the more cerebral stuff.
There's the stuff that is entirely fantastical, and there's the stuff that is, you know, I mean, a body is a bag of meat and bones, right? And there's only so much you can do. So, I mean, you know, some of the more realistic kind of Cronenberg films, let's say, towards the end to middle of his career, something like History of Violence.
Yeah.
It's very much about bodies being riddled and destroyed. And there's the amazing Stephen McHattie scene in the bar where his kind of jaw disappears, and it's kind of very realistic. And it's kind of the limits of the human body. Once you do something to it, it doesn't last very long because it's not very, armored. And you know, a lot of body horror films are about that. And so I think some of the ones we kind of discuss are going to be very much looking at what happens to a human body very realistically. And then there's the other one, which is elasticated nonsense, and it's cartoons, and it's essentially doing as much as you can within limits of imagination.
Yeah.
You know, which is something absolutely kind of formative for most kind of sort of Fangoria kids, where the special effects guys were the rock stars, and it's kind of what you can get away with, and not necessarily grotesque as in, you know, trying to disturb someone. It's very much to do with kind of, you know, well, this is absolutely crazy. How crazy can we go? Yeah. And kind of the limits of the imagination in a kind of, I guess, surrealist, you know, kind of Dada-esque,
yes,
you know, Picasso-esque kind of, well, let's just rearrange this and do that and
exactly.
Everything, and let's see what we've got. That's kind of fun to do with latex. You know, I mean, you get Dan on the podcast quite a lot talking about his effects stuff, Dan Martin, and, you know, the kind of the glee and the
such glee.
Joyful kind of, wonder that he kind of gets from, you know, just being as creative as he can with kind of putting pieces of the body where they're not meant to be is, you know, one of the great pleasures of the fun side of body horror, for sure.
I love it. So, Giles, I gave you the the impossible task, this is usually something I do to Brad Hanson, of coming up with a list of 10-ish body horror movies that we haven't covered this series that you want to recommend to people. Now, I know you've kind of, we probably go beyond just 10. Rather than go chronologically this time, we're going in order of sort of theme, right, of different types of body horror, which is really interesting. But we will just sort of rattle through all of these titles spoiler-free, right, and we'll try and recommend where people can find each one of these films that we discuss.
Yeah, I'll try and do a Letterboxd list as well and whack that up as well, because there will be the films we're talking about, and then I'm sure there will be some mentioned in passing as well. So we'll try and keep it into double figures rather than triple figures.
Yeah, please. So where are you going to start, Giles? What are we going to kick off with?
The first two I kind of really want to talk about, I guess, broadly come under the term medical malpractice.
Ooh, okay.
Which obviously, you know, that's a kind of a key part of body horror. Films like The Fly and American Mary take two very differing tacks to kind of medical procedures and what, you know, medical people will do with the body, be through experimentation or self-experimentation or self-modification, whatever.
Absolutely.
These two films are nothing like that. Well, actually, no, they're not nothing like that. They're more like the Cronenberg thing than maybe the American Mary thing. The first one I want to talk about is Body Parts, which is Eric Red, who is famous as the screenwriter of The Hitcher and Near Dark with Catherine Bigelow. And this is a film he made in the very early 90s with Jeff Fahey. And it's essentially a riff on Mad Love, or The Hands of Orlac, the Peter Lorre film from the 30s.
Bill, there's nothing to worry about. Everything's going to be just fine. You lost your arm in a car accident yesterday. We've transplanted another arm for you.
How does it feel to have someone else's arm?
Dad, it's sort of gross.
Well, that's not how it looks. It's how it works, right? I think there's something the matter with me.
Oh!
It's the arm.
Billy! What's going on?
There's something wrong with the person I used to belong to.
You have this guy's arm. You don't have his personality.
Love it. I have not seen this. So, Giles, tell us a little bit about Body Parts from 1991.
So it's a guy he's in a terrible car crash and he has an arm grafted onto him, and he turns out that arm is the arm of a murderer.
Oh my God.
And guess what happens? You know, carnage is huge. Well, actually, what happens is he discovers that this particular man who gave his body to medical science was, an awful serial killer, and his body parts have been given to other people who have lost limbs and things like that. but this guy is now going around trying to collect those body parts. So kind of a line of bodies is, kind of turning up at the morgue with various parts missing, and a leg or another arm, this and that. And
nice.
Jeff Fahey realizes that he is the next one, and it's it's kind of goofy, it's kind of cartoony in a very kind of EC Comics Tales from the Crypt kind of way. It's kind of got that vibe to it. Very energetic. Some kind of sort of crazy effects with lots of prosthetics and things flying around. An amazing kind of car crash sequence at the beginning.
I'm just looking now. What an amazing cast as well. You've got like Brad Dourif, Jeff Fahey.
Oh, he's insane. Oh, he is the most Dourify of the Dourif. I mean, second only to, I guess, maybe Trauma and Exorcist 3. It's kind of that period, Brad Dourif, where he's what Nicolas Cage sort of is trying to turn into now, but without the kind of the gravitas and the classiness. He's terrific.
I love it.
He's a painter.
That's amazing. And also Lindsay Duncan, like British Olivier award-winning Lindsay Duncan.
She is the crazy scientist, absolutely, who is kind of sort of behind it all. And she's wonderfly evil in the way that I guess English villains were at that particular point in Hollywood films.
That's great.
It's a really terrific film, which is very, very sadly difficult to find in this country. I think it's a Scream Factory DVD, Blu-ray, in the US, and it rocks up on TV occasionally. But it was it was one of those great discoveries, DTV discoveries for me, kind of in the early 90s for sure. I think it got a theatrical release in the US as well. It's quite a big deal that didn't make much money. But
I'm just looking it up now. So it's called Body Parts from 1991. If people do want to check it out, you can rent it on Amazon Prime for £2.49 in the UK. So that's one way you can check it out.
Worth every penny.
There we go.
Seriously, it's a real belter.
I love it. Now I have seen the next film on your list, which is your next film you've listed here under medical malpractice, and this is the absolutely bonkers Splice from 2009, directed by Vincenzo Natali.
If we don't use human DNA now, someone else will.
Regulators and politicians, they tear us to pieces.
Millions of people are suffering and dying. What are the moral considerations of that?
This is illegal. We're gonna go to jail for this.
Human cloning is illegal. This won't be human. Not entirely.
This film is absolutely fucking nuts.
It's bonkers.
It's got Adrian Brody, doing his. I mean, Adrian Brody again was, from Summer of Sam right through the 2000s to our beloved Giallo, Argento Giallo. He's kind of this weird trajectory of very, very intense and charismatic but eccentric performances, and this one is kind of no different. He plays the kind of the love interest of Sarah Polly. They play married scientists they're trying to create this. It's kind of like this, all Cronenberg's thing. It's like it's some kind of genetic mutation research they're doing to kind of presumably better life for the working citizen, but actually really what it is to better the coffers of an awful conglomerate who are financing this research. What they essentially do is create this hybrid creature human who ends up growing very, very quickly and kind of becomes a killing machine, essentially. What happens along the way is that Adrian Brody falls in love with it. So it becomes this weird love triangle between him, his wife, and this kind of sort of beautiful but horrible creature, kind of Fury style kind of sort of creature. And it just goes to some very, very strange places, and it's very gloopy and tumory and fluidy.
It is fluid. I remember having a lot of fun with this film when it first came. I thought it was really, really silly, really fun.
Well, there's an astonishing sequence where they put two of these creatures together, and it's kind of, and the whole thing is obviously Battle of the Sexes as well. It's kind of, it's gender politics and all that kind of stuff. And, the creature is very pointedly female and very pointedly aggressive and alpha. And there's an amazing sequence where they put two of these creatures when they're kind of, before they've become humanoid, kind of together in front of this audience to kind of show them what they're doing. And it turns into this incredibly orgiastic display of two worm tumor creature things beating the entire crap out of each other, ripping each other apart and spreading, their viscera all over the front row of a very highly paid investor audience, and it's kind of like this film was released, very widely in cinemas, and I can't tell you the pleasure I saw watching that with a kind of a packed screening on a Friday night, and people really not knowing what the hell was going on. It's rather fabulous. Yeah,
so good, excellent choice. So that's Splice from 2009. You can, again, it doesn't look like it's streaming anywhere for free, but you can rent it, and also it's there is a beautiful sort of Blu-ray and DVD that you could pick up for Splice as well.
There is a beautiful kind of beautiful looking film as well. I mean, Vincenzo Natali obviously is kind of one of the great kind of Canadian auteurs of the early 2000s. And Cube and Cypher, and his films look stunning, and it's a really kind of sleek and elegant, very blue looking film.
Very blue, exactly.
Very blue.
Love it. Well, there you go. That's Splice. What's next on your list?
So that's kind of medical malpractice, and kind of segueing a little bit into a similar theme. I mean, obviously, one of the kind of, I guess, the key body horror texts of all time is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I mean, it's modern Prometheus man, kind of pulling together bits of human body parts to make humans and the power of God and all that kind of stuff, and it's all very, very much woven into 250 years or whatever of kind of a horror history. I'm going to recommend two slightly off the beaten path versions of Frankenstein. I'd love to have mentioned Carrie the Crown with Frankenstein, which I absolutely fucking love, and I've never ever heard a coherent argument as to why it's regarded so badly, but it is regarded badly. I've never understood it because I think it's an operatic, joyous kind of symphony of glorious Gothic tropes that only kind of Branagh can kind of put together. So I'll never a bad word about it. But we're going for something slightly less high gloss than that. The first one being a film called The Vindicator from 1986, which is another Canadian film.
We have a signal. His brain is communicating directly with the computer.
Well, Dr. Frankenstein, shall we turn him on?
Anytime, Igor.
He's autonomous.
I still don't understand why you connected the rage response activator to the computer. If he senses any kind of threat, he could turn into an uncontrollable killer.
No. As long as I have the remote unit, it'll be my decision when to trigger the reaction.
Produced by Pierre David, who's one of Cronenberg's early backers. He produced the Scanners films and stuff like that, and directed by Jean-Claude Lord, who made one of the original Video Nasty's Visiting Hours, which is a kind of a very rough and tumble, problematic slasher film with Michael Ironside. And I mean, he's a proper pulp exploitation merchant, and this is kind of no different. It was also called Frankenstein 88 or Frankenstein 2000, depending on, I guess, when it was released. Post 88, presumably, it gave the title Frankenstein 2000, but at the time it was Frankenstein 88, and it is essentially, bizarrely enough, it's very much RoboCop, but it came out a year before RoboCop, so it kind of has very, very similar kind of overtones to that. RoboCop, Darkman, that kind of a very prominent scientist is doing great work, but his evil corporate backers don't want to do this research, they want to do that research. He refuses, so what do? They kill him and try and make it like an accident, but his own kind of crazy futuristic engineering is kind of used to kind of bring him back to life, and he becomes a militant vengeance-seeking killing machine, which is essentially what happens. So it's very, very tangentially kind of Frankenstein-y, but it's called Frankenstein 88, so I'm going to go with it. Stan Winston did the effects for it, so it's kind of a kind of a crazy Stan Winston bodysuit, and it's kind of there's lots of explosions and head squashes and things like this. It's pure trash, but in such a wonderfully practical effects geared, cheap yet quite ambitious way that the 80s kind of did so well, and presumably has a lot of Canadian tax money funded into it as well. So the explosions are pretty big. It kind of sort of goes for it, even if the story maybe isn't as polished.
Love it. So that's The Vindicator, or Frankenstein 88 from 1986. Confusingly, it doesn't look like you can it looks like a difficult one to come by. I don't think you can get a nice Blu-ray of it or stream it anywhere. Although, by the looks of it, you can give it a watch on YouTube. It's all right there on YouTube. So that's The Vindicator. And the next movie in your list, I'm just looking here, another kind of Frankenstein-esque story, is called Frankenstein Unbound from 1990 and directed by none other than Roger Corman.
Roger Corman's Frankenstein Unbound, starring John Hurt, Raul Julia, and Bridget Fonda, directed by Roger Corman.
From 1919, stars John Hurt as a futuristic mad scientist who inadvertently rips a hole in time while he's experimenting with whatever he's experimenting with. Again, it's one of these very ephemeral experiments with a capital E that's never really kind of gone into. But he rips a hole in space and time and ends up in early 1800s in Switzerland, where, lo and behold, Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley and Byron all kind of hanging out, and the real Frankenstein is apparently an actual character who Mary Shelley saw and wrote about rather than invented, who's played by Raul Julia in his kind of very elegant. It's about the same era as the Addams Family, so he's got that kind of very, kind of sort of clipped and elegant kind of thing going on as he plays the Baron, who has made his creature and let him go, and he's kind of rampaging around the countryside, and kind of John comes in and, tries to put two and two together and tries to help him kind of rein in this creature and seducing Mary Shelley at the same time. And it's kind of nuts. It's based on a book by Brian Aldiss, who wrote the short story that became AI. So he's kind of, a Ray Bradbury style kind of mid-century speculative fiction kind of author. So it kind of has quite a cultured beginning. The film is certainly not that cultured. I mean, it certainly doesn't really hold a candle to kind of Corman's Poe adaptations, but it does have a kind of a studio-bound gothic elegance to it, and it's it's a 1990 version of futurism. So it's lots of very sleek cars, and the cars and the futuristic stuff looks very much like Demolition Man, bizarrely. And his car went through space and time with him, and he's kind of driving around Geneva, and Bridget Fonda's in it, Michael Hutchins plays Shelley, and Jason Patrick plays Lord Byron. It's a little bit like a slightly less intense Gothic, the Ken Russell film Gothic, which obviously does the same sort of thing in a much more nightmarish kind of way. It's obviously tackling the same things. It has the same kind of camp tone to it, and the same slightly, what would happen if Merchant Ivory kind of went on the lash kind of feel to it. So it doesn't quite work, certainly as a film, but it's just really a really interesting, again, practical version of it. We're kind of used to seeing a lot of this kind of stuff done, very fantastically now. And I think most of those, things like Van Helsing and I Frankenstein, all these kind of iterations of it are done with enormous great vistas now. It's all CG. Whereas this is, it's pretty much entirely practical what they're trying to do. And it feels very lo-fi, but it feels like they're really kind of, trying to come up with this very high concept thing, which now looks very quaint, but there's something lovely about it, and something so earnest about it, and it's it's absolutely daffy and absolutely daft. It's the reason people love the Champions and the Persuaders and Doctor Who, that kind of chintz to it. And it was a big film. It was quite a theatrically released film with real film stars in it. Very early Bridget Fonda, John Hurt,
incredible
cast. These people were well-known people. And so it's I'm not going to make a case for either of those two films being, classic Frankenstein adaptations. No, absolutely not. But if you're looking for something which is, of that ilk, which takes that form and does something kind of weird and unique with it, these two are well worth tracking down. Absolutely.
Amazing. So that was The Vindicator, as we've already mentioned, and Frankenstein Unbound from 1990. Like The Vindicator, seems really difficult to come by. I don't think you can get a nice Blu-ray of that or stream it anywhere. But like The Vindicator, you can watch Frankenstein Unbound on YouTube if you want to check that out. Roger Corman's last movie. Brilliant. Giles, what's next on your list?
So what's next? So from the sublime and ridiculous to something a little bit more intense. I mean, so putting my slightly academic hat on for a while. I mean, I don't hold a candle to Mary Wild, certainly, but I started out this journey to where I am now doing film studies at university. So I come from I did a theoretical 3 years, and being the rabid gorehound I was, I basically used my thesis as an excuse to get as many banned videos and video analysis as I could on the pretense of watching them for actual academic work. And my thesis ended up being on cannibal films, and I had Xavier Mendick, who I guess a lot of readers might know, who runs the Cine Excess Film Festival, was my mentor and my kind of tutor at university, and he kind of pushed me into, okay, we want to watch these films, great, let's find a rationale to do it. And he kind of pushed me towards theorists like Lacan and Julia Kristeva, and the kind of a horror of objection, which I know Mary Wilder's talked about quite a lot. You've got the object, us, abjection, the abject, something other. So it's that kind of push-pull, which is kind of at the very, very heart of body horror. It's kind of bodies being ripped apart. We're very used to seeing bodies whole, and once they're ripped apart, they become something other, and that's what revulses us, and that's where the horror lies. So, kind of body horror is kind of maybe the most intrinsic version of that, because, you see whatever it is, you see the inside of you where it should be, the inside has suddenly come out. You're not used to seeing that. That kind of displaces your kind of sensibilities and kind of drives the horror. So, cannibal films are very, very much in that realm. That's kind of what drives them, that kind of sort of death drive of the cannibal film. And there were two things I kind of wanted to, two films I wanted to look at, which have that really at their core. They're not necessarily traditional narrative horror films. One's a short film, and one's actually a short documentary. So the documentary is by an experimental film called Stan Brakhage, who's very renowned for that 60s experimental kind of documentary form of lots of sound and image and very, very kind of unconventional kind of documentary think pieces, really, rather than someone like Frederick Wiseman, who was kind of making proper, very observational documentaries. Stan Brakhage was all about the kind of texture and feel and sound and vision and things like that. But he made a film fairly early on, which was, not experimental anyway, but certainly fairly radical, called The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes, which is essentially half an hour of him visiting a morgue in the 60s. And it's a very stark, uncompromising, dispassionate look at basically what goes on once you are dead. And it's a very difficult watch. I don't feel it's very exploitative. Some people may think it's exploitative. I don't think it's done that way. I think it's done in a, like I say, a very dispassionate kind of exploratory manner. There's kind of no narration. There's no music. There's no, it is what it is. It's just showing you this is what we are. We are meat and bones and what have you. And this is, the end for all of us, I guess. And it's a fascinating thing to watch because it is so simplistic, yet it's so radical in that kind of way. Yeah. And I think, a lot of things there have been other documentaries and films that have kind of looked at a similar a similar kind of milieu. I mean, even things like Aftermath, the Nacho Cerda film, which is kind of set in a morgue, and they've taken it to kind of shock value and kind of really pushed the extremity of it and kind of the dark irony or the black humor or the shock value of the whole thing. Yeah. And what's so shocking about this film is that this is it. Where we will all end up, and it becomes tough watch, but a really fascinating view.
I'm actually just like it's on YouTube. I just looked it up when you were talking about it.
And it's very easily available on YouTube.
Yeah, and it just started playing, and I was like, "Whoa, okay, so this is genuine footage of dead bodies in autopsies in morgues."
If you've got a strong stomach and a dark sensibility in that kind of way, it's a really fascinating. And you obviously remember an early film. This is, I guess around the same time or just before the kind of the Mondo films, which were really the exploitation version of this kind of stuff. I don't know whether the Jacopetti and Prosperi, who kind of did Monocane and Africadia, whether they actually saw this and went that way, or whether it just was in the times of, kind of 60s, 70s, everything was kind of, free love and hardcore porn and violence and Vietnam, and, it was just in the air, right? So maybe they did come off this, but it is the polar opposite of that. It's not, it is shattering and unpleasant and disturbing, but I think also very kind of fascinating, vital and human.
I love it. That's really interesting. So that is a documentary, 30 minutes long, and it's called The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes, 1971. And like we said, you can just check that out on YouTube if you think you're up to it. Now, the next... I love this next choice, Giles. The next choice that Giles has listed here is... this is actually a segment from an anthology film, The ABCs of Death 2. And this particular short film you want to recommend from this anthology is called Z is for Zygote.
The midwife said chewing on the port locker it'll slow down the baby until I can get her from town. Just take small bites.
No, Ty, please don't leave. I don't want to be alone.
You'll be
please.
fine. There's years enough root in that jar, and she's not even a half a day out.
Come back! Ty! I don't want to be alone again, please! Ty!
It's a Canadian filmmaker called Chris Nash, who is some kind of makeup effects genius, I have to say. And it's essentially about a woman who is pregnant and her husband goes away for what is a very, very long period of time, never really explained. And during that time, she kind of doesn't want to give birth to this thing yet, so it grows inside her, and it grows inside her, especially as a teenager while it's still inside her.
Yes.
And it's, it doesn't take a lot to kind of pass what is the subtext there. It is about, parenthood and motherhood. Weirdly, inadvertently, he's also made the kind of the perfect lockdown film as well, because this is kind of what it feels like for all of us. We're kind of sitting there and just things are going and going and going. But I'm not going to give anything away with this. Obviously, we're fairly spoiler free here. But it's 7 minutes of absolutely insane body horror, which is again simple, so effective, really. And not unpleasant. I'm not going to say it's unpleasant because the whole thing is done with a very, very kind of dark, gallows humour. But it's genuinely eye-opening and jaw-dropping, kind of what happens and where it goes. And Chris Nash has got a couple of films he's doing, feature films, I think, trying to get up and running at the moment in Canada. And I'll watch anything this guy does. He's got a crazy imagination. Yeah. And so his effects work is pretty astonishing. So regardless of what you think about the rest of the ABCs of Death 2, it's a gem, a gem of a short film.
I completely agree.
Absolutely knocks you out.
It's my favourite. I remember it being my favourite in the ABCs of Death 2. And actually, those films, like you say, they're a mixed bag, but they're a hell of a lot of fun. Actually, I think because each of these stories are like 6 minutes. You could just rattle through them. They're all so different.
If you don't like one, another comes along the next. Absolutely. I mean, that's what the basis of an anthology film, and those really, you have to commit to that anthology because there's 26 of them, and some of them are. They are varying. They cater to all tastes. I think is probably the nice way of saying it. Yeah. But this one really kicks off. Winds up. Sorry, with a kicker of a final entry. It really is. One of the great short films I think of the last decade or so.
I love it.
Yeah, those two. A slightly mismatched pair, but I think they're both about just pure horror of what your body is and what it can do, and there's no real supernatural stuff to it. There's no, I mean, Z for Zygote is very fantastical, but there's no exterior force. It is just your own body and what is inside you, and two slightly divergent viewpoints of what they are. But I think they make a kind of a nice, slightly sick pair to watch together, I think.
It's great. What a fun pair. So there you go. So that second one was Z is for Zygote, and that is from, like we said, ABCs of Death 2. You can rent that online in all the usual places. So give it a watch if you're up. If you like anthologies, I think it's good fun.
It's great. It's great.
All right, what's next?
So let's see. I mean, you know what? Reading these, they do sort of follow a sort of pattern. So
I didn't
plan this, but they sort of go through. So I've kind of vaguely kind of termed this kind of from within. I guess they're kind of. Whereas those two films were very much about stuff happening, there wasn't really a reason for it. These two films are very much about, okay, something has invaded your body and shit is going to go down. The first one is called The Bite, Curse 2, which is an Italian-American co-production.
More lethal. More repelling. More terrifying. It can live anywhere.
I ain't a human being for about 100 miles.
It can strike when you least expect.
Something weird going on around here. I can feel it. What the hell is this in the road? Son of a bitch!
I just ran over about 100 snakes back down the road here.
It will always be man's darkest fear.
Where are they going? Straight to hell. Where they belong.
The Bite.
There's an Egyptian Greek producer called Ovidio Arsenitis, who is probably most famous for a film called The Visitor, with Lance Henriksen and John Huston. Very, very kind of crazy, weird, kind of post-Omen sort of supernatural horror thriller metaphysical thing that I believe Draft House brought out on DVD a few years ago, but quite well known within kind of sort of nerd circles. And he also he produced Piranha 2. That was another one that he kind of sort of got his hands on. He ended up taking over from James Cameron and kicking him off and finishing that. And then he's worked with Alberto Lenzi and Aldo Lado and did quite a lot in Europe in the sort of 70s and 80s. But his real primary, focus is pure schlock.
Yeah. And
I don't think he gets any schlockier than The Bite, which is, it stars Jill Schoelen from The Stepfather.
Nice.
And a delightfully named J. Eddie Peck, who didn't really got to do anything else, but has an amazing name. And Bo Svensson's in there as well from the Walking Tall films. And it's about a couple who are driving across New Mexico, in the kind of the nuclear badlands, and there are snakes around, and J.D. Peck gets bitten by a snake, and his hand turns into a snake.
Oh, brilliant.
And it goes on from there, and it's got some absolute... I mean, look, again, as with most exploitation films, there's a lot of filler, there's a lot of padding. He gets an injection from a kind of a crazy drunk doctor at a bar just after his hand's been bitten, and the doctor thinks that he's given him the wrong injection. He chases after him, so there's kind of sort of a road chase element. And he thinks that the mutation's caused by his kind of whichever serum he's kind of given him. But it's all about the radioactive snakes, and it kind of goes to a place which I can only describe as society level Glee in makeup effects.
Ooh.
Primarily because Screaming Mad George, who did the effects in Society, did the effects at the end of The Bite.
Right.
And it is full snake transformation stuff. It's absolutely joyous to behold. It takes a while to get there, but those last 50 minutes are just pure 80s prosthetic, orgiastic effect showcase kind of a piece. Again, I think Scream Factory have released it on Blu-ray, bizarrely enough. I never thought I'd see it on Blu-ray. It's a really bizarre series. So the Curse films were it's kind of a loosely connected trilogy. One was called Blood Harvest with Christopher Lee, which is a later one, which is fucking terrible. The Bite, which is amazing, and the first one was with Will Wheaton, called The Curse, which is essentially The Color Out Space. Oh. An adaptation of Color Out Space called The Curse, directed by David Keith from White of the Eye and Officer Gentleman, and that was the first Curse, and then this became The Curse 2, and I'm assuming there's a similar producer at some point down the line, or a similar kind of sort of production company, so they became this kind of loose trilogy of very gnarly exploitation films. But and The Curse, the first one is quite good. Lucio Fulci kind of finished that film as well. He was creative consultant on it, but The Bite is definitely the peak of this, not a great trilogy of films, but certainly a kind of a really fun, notable late 80s kind of entry into that kind of sort of Euro trash meets US kind of horror cycle. And like I say, the last 15 minutes are pure body horror. I mean, it's wild. It's absolutely wild. The effects are genuinely world class. And like I say, it's Screaming Mad George, who is kind of one of the denizens of that kind of 80s rock star group of kind of effects guys like Mark Shostrom and John Vullage and Alec Gillis and people like that, post Savini kind of effects rock stars and the K&B guys. He was one of the most notable, and he just goes for broke in this. It's amazing.
Interesting. And yeah, like you say, you can get that. There's a Scream Factory Blu-ray of The Curse and Curse 2 The Bite that you can get together.
Well worth it. Absolutely well worth it.
There you go.
And then another film which is, similar but with a vastly bigger budget, Leviathan, which kind of came out in that kind of Abyss, Deep Star 6 aquatic horror kind of kind of end of the 80s kind of glut. It's kind of the volcano and Dante's Peak, Deep Impact, Armageddon kind of, you get two of these films along at once, and Deep Star 6 and Leviathan and The Abyss all kind of came out, and they're all about undersea mining explorations and things. But whereas Deep Star 6 was a bit more kind of creature featurey, The Abyss was very much kind of aliens and beautiful ecological kind of messages. Leviathan is about tainted vodka and what that can do to a body once consumed.
It was an experiment that tampered with nature's most basic laws. It went terribly wrong. It was buried 5 miles down. Now, a crew of undersea miners is about to stumble upon this terrifying secret.
Shack to 7. What's going on out there, Williams?
My God, are you picking this up?
Look at that. Leviathan.
Currently with a Russian fleet in the Baltic Sea.
Currently it's rusted junk and we're looking at it. What's your air reading?
20 minutes.
Do something quick. We've lost him. My crew's in jeopardy.
But you have no proof.
I'm ordering you to start an emergency medical evacuation.
What if it turns out to be nothing?
Help me.
It's already killed one man.
My rebreather stopped. I'm losing compression. I can't breathe.
Whatever got Six-Pack and Bowman, it's still here.
I feel something. Somebody's alive in here.
What's going on?
This is the late 80s, and the Cold War is still looming large, and the Russians are tainting vodka for some unknown purpose. But the vodka is consumed by Daniel Stern, one of the crewmates. So Daniel Stern's in it. Peter Weller is in this. Amanda Page, Ernie Hudson, Richard Crenna, Amanda Page, Daniel Stern. It's a great fucking cast. I mean, it really is. Richard Crenna is in it because, of course, it's directed by Panos Cosmatos' dad, who made obviously Rambo 2 and Cobra, kind of action master. And so Richard kind of comes along, I'm assuming for a favour, but it's a high class cast for what is primo trash. I mean, it's crazy. So Daniel Stern drinks this tainted vodka, and essentially starts mutating, and the creature rampages around the ship. I mean, there's nothing more to it than that.
Nice.
But to see it done on such a scale is kind of amazing. I think it's written by David Peoples, I believe, wrote some. Yeah, David Webb Peoples and Jeb Stewart, who done some work on Die Hard. So it was Charles Gordon who produced Die Hard. Yeah, it was a proper studio film.
Yeah, Jerry Goldsmith did the score.
Yeah, it's just absolute trash, but made on such a great budget. And the melding of those two worlds, just like it, just you're not used to seeing something done with such sort of shimmering elegance as this. And again, look, the film probably on the scale of The Abyss to Deep Star 6, it's definitely in the Deep Star 6 category,
right.
For sure. But there's something, I mean, the film Life, which came out a couple of years ago, did a similar thing.
Yes.
There's something joyous about watching recognisable stars kind of getting gobbled up by makeup effects and kind of just going for broke, like I guess stars would have done in the 60s and 70s, and kind of Hammer films, Amicus films and things like that. Really recognisable people. Kind of, they're not slumming it at all. They're just having a fucking good time doing something that is pure pulp.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe people haven't revisited for a while, and I think the taste of it now is a little bit looked down on. I think, but it's well worth a revisit because it has, again, it's practical. It's all done, a time before CG, and it's weird. All the underwater scenes really are done dry for wet, so it's kind of really weird to look at. They all kind of pretend to be underwater. There's dust floating in the air, and it's kind of done with a kind of real tactile, kind of practical production aesthetic, which is. It gets something really lovely to look back on, and not in a weird nostalgia bait kind of way, but just like, it's really properly made. They're really treating this seriously, even though it's absolute junk.
Nice.
So I'm an absolute sucker for that kind of stuff. Maybe now more than ever, I've kind of got to a certain age. I'm looking back and going, do you know what? Actually, there is a kind of a care and an effort put in to something you can't fix later.
Yeah.
But I think was very much the case in kind of sort of late 80s, early 90s kind of action thriller kind of blockbuster stuff. So
love it.
Yeah, for that reason, I'll go to the mat for this lovely piece of trash for sure.
Sounds great. So that's Leviathan from 1989. It looks like you can pick up a DVD of it in the UK, but I don't know whether there's anything better than that available by the looks of it.
Whether it would look any better in Blu-ray, I don't know.
Yes.
I think maybe VHS is the best way to go for it.
And you can also stream it on YouTube, but I've just looked it up, so there you go. It's out there. Amazing. All right, what's next?
So let's go a bit more splattery now. I know one guy you really wanted to kind of look at that you probably haven't covered yet is Frank Henenlotter.
Yes, because I feel like I love Frank Henenlotter. I love his films, and I feel like all of his films in his quite small filmography really fit the bill, right, of this theme of body horror. I know you mainly wanted to talk about Brain Damage, which we'll get to, but first of all, I've just got to spend a moment talking about Basket Case.
What is the secret Dwayne is hiding in the basket?
What's in the basket? Easter eggs?
What's in the basket?
Clothes. What's in the basket?
Nothing.
So Basket Case is like, I guess you could say it's kind of a slasher, right? But it's also got this hilarious kind of body horror element to it. It focuses on a character called Dwayne, which I love. I love that his name's Dwayne. Dwayne Bradley, who arrives in New York City, and he's carrying with him this wicker basket, and he keeps meeting people. He goes and stays at this horrible scuzzy hotel, right? And he keeps meeting all these different people. He hooks up with women, and he's making friends, and he's doing this and this and that. And people are all like, what's in the basket? Why'd you carry that basket around with you? What's in the basket? And eventually we find out what's in the basket, and it's his deformed brother, who was originally a conjoined twin, who they then had removed, and is now living in the basket and is this kind of homicidal maniac.
Open it, if you dare. Basket Case.
Frank Henlotter is one of the great US grindhouse auteurs. I mean, Basket Case, he kind of came out running with this 60mm proper grungy, couldn't be more 42nd Street kind of, independent film, which is, weird and strange and eccentric and funny and disgusting and perverse and, just kind of, people now, when they break into the horror industry, they're kind of small, low-budget films. They tend to have, a modicum of like, well, I want people to appreciate my art and see me as this kind of person who they can invest more money in to do this. And Frank Henlotter is like, no, fuck that. I'm putting this weird, strange tale of a man and his twin in all its glory, absolutely kind of no holds barred. And it's just, they really don't make things like this anymore in such a kind of a straight and unabashed way. It really is. Yeah, it's quite something to watch even 30, 40 years later.
I saw it a couple of years ago at, of all places, the Regent Street Cinema. It was like such a...
Oh, wow.
Which is such a beautiful old cinema, isn't it?
It is, but they've got a hell of a programmer there who loves that.
Yes, and actually, it was actually Prano Bailey Bond who was sort of hosting it as well. They were doing like a little showcase of her short films, and then she got to pick what film she then screened, and it was Basket Case, and it was such a funny. I mean, just
Cthulhu
what a brilliant...
bless Prano Bailey Bond. I tell you that lady knows exactly what she's made of. I tell you, it is, and it's a weird film because it's also a very sweet story of two brothers who are entirely devoted. Well, one has to be devoted to each other because one's growing out from this guy's side. So it's kind
brilliant.
of a classic old story. It's very much Todd Browning's Freaks, but it's also kind of Larry Cohen's kind of New York, and it's kind of John Waters' Poor Taste. And it's all that kind of sort of mashed up. Really into, kind of, let's say, this like 42nd Street kind of, it's what you think of when you think of New York in the 80s. It's like, it must have just been like this, just dangerous, weird, strange, dirty, and you never knew what was going to kind of round the corner when you kind of turned it next. And maybe it's a, muted brother attached to a man's hip. Maybe.
It's so good. His little face when he pops out of the basket. It's absolutely amazing.
They had two sequels after it as well, which kind of tried to make, I'm not going to say they tried to make it more glossy or elegant, absolutely not. But they were very much of the early 90s DTV world rather than the kind of the 16mm kind of grindhouse world. Yeah. So they're a little bit more funny, a little bit more playful. The Belial, the freaky guy, kind of goes and lives with a whole menagerie of freaks. It's a bit more like that kind of dark Todd Browning Freaks thing than the kind of the scuzzy 42nd Street kind of vibe of the first film. And it's the two sequels aren't great, I have to say. They're certainly not as potent as the first film. But, in terms of showcasing someone like Gabe Bartelos, the effects guy's kind of imagination, and, they're very much of the Streamer Mad George level of kind of wit and creativity and just absolutely bug nuts eccentricity. And the weirdest thing about the sequels is they star this woman called Annie Ross, who's a jazz singer, and she 2 years later would rock up in Shortcuts of all things. Kind of a really kind of affecting performance as this Asian jazz singer, Robert Altman Shortcuts. And 2 years before, she was kind of running around with this, kind of rubber nightmare and Frank Henlotter kind of, shouting obscenities and what have you. So it's just it's great. It's so strange, and they honestly, I mean, it's not they don't make them anymore. I think they don't have filmmakers like Frank Henlotter anymore to kind of make this stuff. It's, just some of the balls to kind of go, do you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And no one's going to talk me out of it. No one's going to tell me. I know it's uncommercial. I know it's weird. I know it's crazy. I know it's just unpalatable to a lot of people, but I'm going to make it. That's the thing. No one wants to, to kind of have that.
No, you're so right. It's
ambition at the moment.
He's doing completely what he wants to do. And actually, looking at his filmography, I mean, most of his stuff in some way tick this box of our subject matter, right? I mean, he's basically done a bunch of body.
He's
horrors.
A fucking weird filmmaker. He used to work for Something Weird Video as well. So I mean, his whole thing is just the outsider, the weird, the strange, the perverse, the abject. He totally is. He's about that in all shapes and forms, but in a kind of a loving way.
Yeah.
It seems very reverent. It seems like, it's his band of freaks and he loves it, and that seems to be his thing.
Yeah.
He's never looking down on it. He's never kind of pointing his finger, or he is literally waving it in your face, but he's not making there's no judgment there. I think it's kind of, people are weird.
Yeah.
Sex is weird. Bodies are weird. This stuff happens.
Yeah.
That Bad Biology, the last film he did about 10 years ago, was much more kind of highly sexualized than anything else, but it was still the same. It was a bit more Cronenbergian in that kind of way.
Yeah.
And it was about genitals and bodies and sex and procreation and how awful that might be, and all these kind of things going to consent and responsibility, all these things that kind of go on between couples, and just taken to such a kind of a weird, plasticky, rubbery, perverse extreme.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I guess, it's maybe the ultimate great note to his career, what he's building to in a kind of a more permissive 21st century.
Yeah.
But the one a long way around, the one I actually wanted to talk to you about was Brain Damage. So Brain Damage, which is kind of, I guess, probably his most well-known film, and I think maybe his most accessible film to a lot of people. It's it comes towards the tail end of the 80s, so it's a little bit more refined than the first Basket Case. And it's a story of a boy and his phallic worm that injects him with hallucinatory drugs to make life worth living in a horrendous New York. So it's just time old tale, really.
Yeah. It's funny. One night you go to bed, and when you wake up, everything is different. Now Brian's acting a little peculiar.
He's like a completely different person. I don't even know him anymore.
Something's gotten into him.
Sometimes everything glows with a different kind of light.
Deep into him.
What are you telling me? That we killed someone last night?
Something bad.
Tacky, Brian, tacky.
Something slimy.
What are you doing?
Something very...
I know something's happened to you.
Very...
How is that?
Hungry.
It starts off with this elderly couple, and there's a film from the 60s called The Sorcerers, which Michael Reeves made with Boris Karloff, and it had a similar old couple who wanted to use youth to kind of revitalize their own kind of aging kind of senses and things like that. And in this film, there's this couple who have this little thing called Elmer, which is a little phallic turd-like alien creature. I mean, you never really find out where he came from.
Yeah.
He's just there, and he speaks, and he talks, and he sings Frank Sinatra songs, and he does all this kind of stuff. He's very kind of Looney Tunesy, but he is owned by this old couple, and they feed him brains, and he gives them this hallucinatory stuff that kind of makes their aged life worth living. And one day they lose him, and he crawls into the apartment of this guy next door, who is kind of a mid-20s kind of sort of slacker, and his life is revitalized as well. So the film is essentially him learning to cope with this little thing and realizing what he has to do, which is feed it brains around New York. But the prize for him is these wonderfully hallucinatory, experimental, kind of colorful sequences of lights and sound, and it's kind of very trippy. And these two old people kind of chasing him kind of through New York and trying to find their Elmer.
Yeah.
And it's if you took away all the perverseness and the weirdness, it's kind of a sweet little story about this kind of guy learning to find himself, and it's very humane and very human, but just done with this incredibly weird, perverse lens. And like I say, there are things in it you'll never see in any other film. It's bursting with imagination. It's got some crazy weird effects. It's a proper original in a way that I don't think people have the audacity to think like this with their kind of creativity now. I mean, God knows what the budget was at the time, but it's there's lots of stuff going on. It wasn't made with some friends over a weekend. It was it's a real film.
Yeah,
it's very much got that street trashy vibe as well. Like kind of it's decrepit, dirty, New York, but slightly dangerous and slightly, mad. And it's I guess it was made at that time where New York was kind of on the cusp of kind of turning it across. So it wasn't quite Grindhouse, but it wasn't quite cultivated anymore. So it does, it feels it feels a bit dangerous, and it feels it's all junkyards and kind of crazy hobos and things like that. But it's full of light. It's a really funny film.
Yeah.
It's I guess it's a tragedy in kind of the way a lot of horror films tend to be. It doesn't end happily necessarily, but it's there's a lot of fun and invention to be had along the way. It's absolutely cracking.
Oh god, it's so much fun. So there you go. So that was our little Frank Hellenlotter section there. Basket Case. You can get the whole trilogy on Blu-ray for $13.99. Just give yourself a treat and pick up the Blu-ray. It's worth every penny. I've not seen the sequels, actually, so I'm going to pick this up myself and give the sequels a watch. And Brain Damage is really easy to get hold of as well. You can get a nice Arrow Blu-ray of that, but it's also streaming right now on Shudder. So there you go, Basket Case and Brain Damage. And, check out Frankenhooker as well, because why not? While you're at it, Okay, at this point in the episode, we're going to take a quick momentary break from our Also Rans chat, because this month is Women in Horror Month, so it's a perfect time, in a way, to be shouting about some really interesting new projects from women in the horror world. And excitingly, there's somebody right here in the EOH family who's got a brand new project that they're launching this week, so I thought, what better time to talk about it? So joining us to tell us a little bit more is Zobo with a Shotgun. Hello.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, really good, actually. Tired, but that's
yeah.
As my old boss used to say, it's just a state of mind.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, sleep when you're dead, right? It's fine,
Right? We've got loads of time. We're fine.
Exactly. How exciting. So I just wanted to have a quick chat with you about this exciting new project that you've got going on at the moment. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on to discuss a little bit about the project. So we have a brand new project called Ghouls Magazine. You'll see from the logo and the Ghouls that it's a bit of a pun on strippers and all of that.
Nice.
We thought we'd have some fun with it, but essentially it is a brand new horror website, a bit of an online magazine, and we are going to be showcasing the very best in horror written through the female perspective, and we are hopefully slashing through the noise a little bit to provide insight and analysis on film, and we've got a awesome team of writers, women and non-binary writers. So I think that we are going to be able to provide a really broad and hopefully a bit of a different perspective on horror, hopefully.
That's so cool. So how long have you been sort of thinking about this? How long has this idea of, creating this magazine been sort of permeating in your head?
Yeah, I had, it was probably obviously, we've been in lockdown for what seems like forever now. Yeah. We're coming up to the good old year anniversary, which is super exciting.
God,
and I think last year at some point I was like, she'll probably do another project with all this spare time. And yeah, put a couple of notes on my phone where I was like, oh, Ghouls Magazine could be a cool idea. And then, to be honest, I thought nothing of it, and I was like, no, I can't really be bothered, got Zobo, got other things going on. And then, over Christmas time, had some time off work, and I was just like, fuck it, let's do it, let's make it a reality. And yeah, surprisingly, it's kicked off a lot. Lots of people are really excited, and yeah, it seems to be, I don't know how, I have no idea how it happened, but yeah, it seems to be going well.
That's amazing. Well, that's so exciting. I think, obviously already by the looks of it, you've got some amazing writers involved. And was this something that you always had in mind, that you wanted to make it particularly sort of focused on women in the industry?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, thinking about kind of when I first got into film criticism, I did journalism at university, and I remember speaking to someone from Heat magazine that was a film journalist, and he said to me, one of the things that are severely missing from the industry is more female voices in horror especially. And I think since then I've always had this kind of like little bug in the back of my head saying like there's something there, and as you know, Mike, I love extreme, and I think that's particularly niche, and there's not a lot of women or females that are talking about that. And obviously I kind of somehow got myself down into that rabbit hole where it's Saturday morning, I'm like, I'll just pop on a Serbian film, as you know, and I fortunately got you to join in on that one a few times as well.
I know, you've corrupted me there, Zoe.
I know. Do you know what? A few people have actually said like, this is your doing of this show, and I was like, Mike loves it really. Any excuse. And so I think and since that, I mean, that was a long time ago. That was at university, but I think over the years I've seen that there's still a lot of room for this female perspective, and as I mentioned, obviously it is women writers, but I think it's also non-binary writers as well that can provide this specific perspective on the genre. And I just think reading some of the articles we've got, it's just so fascinating to see how women and non-binary writers connect with horror. And I think there's definitely still gaps, and I think there's gaps all over the industry for plenty of different types of people and communities to have their voice heard. So why not add one more into the mix and help to do our bit where possible.
Amazing. That's so cool. How exciting. So are you still going to continue doing extreme cinema and Zobo with a shotgun stuff as well? Is that still going to continue?
Of course. I mean, is there any chance of me not, not watching people get hacked to pieces? And actually, on the site, I was like, can I do a little extreme column, which I've called Films to Ruin Your Day, which my boyfriend was like, yeah, they're literally films that are going to ruin lives, not days.
That's a great
and I was
idea.
like,
yeah, very cool.
So it's still there, don't worry.
I love it. So this discussion is going to go out on Friday, the 19th of February. And actually, you've got a day of events happening tomorrow, haven't you? On Saturday, the 20th. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so on Saturday, 20th, we have got a bit of a crazy day planned, hoping that Zoom does not break on me. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of fuck up. But we have got 4 events planned over the course of the day, with lots of people involved, and hopefully, if all goes to plan and Zoom doesn't, have a meltdown and my internet also holds out, fingers crossed, Virgin Media. Yeah, it should be a pretty exciting day on Saturday for Ghouls Magazine.
I love it. You've got a quiz, haven't you? I love a quiz, Zoe. I'll be there for that.
I know. I have. So the quiz is made by our assistant editor, Rebecca McCallum.
Love it.
I've got to say, I did the quiz and I got like 5 questions right out of, I think there's like 60. So yeah, it's really, really good. It's an amazing quiz. I'm just, Mike, you should know by now, I am shit at quizzes. It's why I get so anxious about doing them. They're hard. Yeah. Yours are hard as well.
I know. Well, do you know what? I love hosting quizzes. I love writing quizzes, but I'm terrible at actually doing quizzes myself. People who remember the old days of this podcast when Brian Ryan used to quiz me will know how bad I am. But I still love a quiz, so I'm looking forward to doing that. If anyone out there's listening, maybe, come and join me, come and be on my team and help me out, because I don't know, my brain is really bad at retaining like names and dates and stuff like that,
Names and dates, I'm pretty sure that was Bob Roberts, and they're like, who is that? And I'm like, I'm just pulling, It was 1497 and the film was called Coat Hanger.
Yeah.
Let's go with it.
Why not? That's great. Amazing. So where can people find all the details of this and everything if they want to check out their new website or if they want to come and join any events?
So the new website is not available yet. It's going to be launched on the Saturday as well. We are just furiously trying to make sure that everything works and is fine. It is, but always that slight panic. We're over on Twitter at Ghouls Magazine, Instagram at Ghouls Mag, and then on Facebook we are Ghouls Magazine, and our event for the day with all the details, with the links to the Zooms, and with all of the who's going to be attending, the panelists, etc., is over on the Facebook events page through Ghouls Magazine. People can also drop us an email at editors at Ghouls Magazine if they need to. But if they hit us up on any social media channels, they'll be able to find out more about the events and what we're up to.
That's very cool. And also there might be people listening to this, women and non-binary listeners who are interested in writing about horror. I know that I've had emails in the past from people who have asked if they can write pieces for the Evolution of Horror website and blog section. I am rubbish at keeping up with that, so I never get to make that happen. But are you still looking for writers? Could people still write to you with pitches and that kind of thing?
Absolutely, yeah. We are at the moment, we're very open to new writers. So anyone listening that is a woman in horror or a non-binary writer, get in touch at editor at Ghouls Magazine, and we'll get back to you. We'd love more submissions and pitches. And me and Rebecca will endlessly type away furiously at our email inbox, which is becoming very full. But yes, we're absolutely taking on new writers.
Love it. Amazing. Well, Zoe, thank you so much for this. My final question for you, as it's Women in Horror Month, I want some on the spot. I didn't ask you to prepare for this, so I apologize, but I want some on the spot horror film recommendations directed by women. What movies out there should people be checking out?
I think the first one I would recommend is Raw.
Oh yeah.
Which, my God, I absolutely love that film to pieces. Then another film I would recommend that is by a female director, American Psycho.
Oh,
love that
what a film, I know.
Oh, so good. And I think often we overlook the fact that actually it was directed by a female, which is interesting.
I think it's because you think of it as such a male story, don't you, I think?
Yeah, and then my final two would be American Mary by the Soska sisters. Love that movie. And then one that I saw recently, which I think a lot of people have been talking about, is Promising Young Woman.
Oh my God,
that took me aback quite a bit. As you can tell, I like a good rape revenge, not going to lie. It's a bit my vibe.
Yes, your vibe, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, do you know what? I'm like, fuck it, let's just get revenge on the men. As much as I love men, because I really do, but I also love a good revenge.
Yeah, they need to be punished sometimes. It's fine. Zoe, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
Roses are red, violets are blue. I'll attach you to your friend and make you eat their poo. Stevie.
The human centipede.
Correct.
I'm dead.
Hello, everybody. That was a little clip you just heard there from my chat with my Dream Warriors, Stevie Webb and Becky Dark. Over on Patreon last week, we brought you a very special Valentine episode in which, as well as a little Valentine quiz that you heard there, I discussed two classic Valentine slasher movies with Stevie and Becky. That is My Bloody Valentine from 1981, 40 years old this week, and Valentine from 2001, 20 years old this week. The perfect opportunity to discuss these movies in depth. It was such a funny conversation. It was such a great discussion. And that episode is available right now for $5 donors and upwards. So if you want to subscribe and get treated to regular bonus episodes much like that one, then sign up now. Head over to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. For $5 per month, you'll get regular bonus episodes such as the Valentine episode. This week we're bringing $5 donors an episode in which me and Louise Blaine discussed and reviewed Sator, very creepy new horror movie which is out on demand this week. But you can also sign up to our $10 level, which will give you bonus episodes every single week, and you'll also get access to our exclusive mini seasons such as our Hitchcock retrospective and our Saw retrospective, which will be continuing in the next couple of weeks. You can also sign up at top level, that's $20 per month, and for that you'll get access to absolutely everything, as well as becoming an official Evolution of Horror sponsor and getting a little video message from me as a thank you. Everybody who signs up will get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker if they're UK based, and everybody who signs up will get a very special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the last couple of weeks a very special thanks. So a big thank you to Gabrielle Trevino, Jason Strong, Charlotte Jepson, Joel Gom, Emma Gradwell, Rashmi Menon, Stephen Mack, Tara Strongoski, Hannah, Miriam Meany, Verena Reiber, Jessica Gonzalez, Scott Vanderkratz, Nicole Verl, Laura Faun, Katrina Mason, Melissa Venz, Christabel Reiter, Lindsay Moradon, Nina Luff, John White, Liz Hastings, Nicole Irizarry, Charlotte Louise, Michael Keenan, Joe Budd, and Michael Sharland. A huge thank you to all of those people. And one more time, if you want to join them, if you want to help support the making of this podcast and get regular bonus treats, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Okay, let's continue into the second half of my conversation with Giles Edwards as we continue our body horror also-rans.
And so, keeping with a slightly splattery theme, slightly less psychedelic, but certainly no less weird. Is the Hong Kong film Ricky O, the story of Ricky.
Mm-hmm.
Which is was quite a notorious shared VHS in my day. Now available on beautiful, pristine Blu-rays and DVDs. I think Hong Kong Legends brought it out some while ago, and I'm sure some enterprising labels brought it out looking even more pristine. This film's a trip, man. It's just, it's basically, to describe it in the elevator pitch, it's kind of like Brawl in Cell Block 9, the
99, yeah,
the Cell 99, sorry, with more laughs. It's it's that kind of thing. It's a guy essentially in prison fighting his way through a series of people, the titular Ricky, fighting his way through a series of big boss type guys.
Perfect.
From computer games. It is cartoony, it is Looney Tunes, it is incredibly violent in the most creative and insanely over the top kind of ways. He's kind of like a superhero type. He punches people, right, and his arm goes completely through them, and they're kind of huge, kind of great hulking kind of bodyguards and heavies kind of come in, and he absolutely pulverizes them. And it's a proper kind of weird, wild effect showcase, a bit like a more low rent Stephen Chow, that kind of thing. So you have Kung Fu Hustle, where it's just really over the top and crazy, and that's the more palatable kind of post Crouching Tiger version. This is the down and dirty, we're in the 80s practical effects budget be damned kind of version of that. So it's it's just is there a story? Yeah, somewhere buried in there. It's kind of a very kind of traditional kind of innocent guy against the odds kind of thing, but it's essentially it's a guy fighting his way through a lot of heavies in spectacular fashion. So the director made a couple of other kind of crazy movies, one called The Seventh Curse and one called The Black Cat, which are kind of notorious kind of Hong Kong kind of gore, horror, action kind of sort of pieces as well. So that trilogy, Black Cat, Seventh Curse, and Ricky O. It's Lam Nai Choi is the filmmaker, and again, just someone who just he's got a style, and he goes with it. He's you don't see a lot that's like this. I mean, you see a lot like this in Asian cinema. I think they definitely have a surfeit of imagination and audacity, but never quite to this degree. The story of Ricky really is just one that you will want to push on your friends immediately you see it, because even today, in kind of sort of a post brain dead kind of world, it's pretty jaw dropping in kind of where it goes in terms of sort of bodily dysfunction and harm.
Oh, I love it. That sounds great. So that's Ricky O, the story of Ricky, which is, it looks like there's a nice Blu-ray available of it as well. Which you can
yes. I think this one's fairly, like I say, when I in my day, kids, this was back pages of Dark Side, trying to get it off, some kind of Hong Kong bootlegger. But yeah, it's I'm sure it looks even better in polished up. It's not a cheap film. It's relatively. It's it's definitely had it's definitely got an effects budget. Put it that way.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, all right, that's great. What's next?
Well, let's go on to the touching subject of motherhood.
Oh, God.
We touched on it a little bit with Zifa Zygo, but two of my very favourite malefic motherhood films, The Unborn and Baby Blood.
Interesting. Let's begin then. Let's start by talking about The Unborn from 1991.
Technology of in vitro pregnancy has progressed so rapidly that today almost anything is possible.
I'm gonna be a mother.
They wanted it more than anything.
Meyerling really is the best. His success rate with infertility is close to 100%.
They thought it was impossible.
Your case is trickier than some, but I don't anticipate any difficulty.
Dr. Meyerling gave me these pills. Don't take them.
Stop fighting it.
I don't trust him.
Let it happen.
He's not an ordinary doctor.
We'll take care of you.
A geneticist with a vision.
They are better, stronger, more intelligent. They don't mean to cause harm.
There's this thing growing inside of me.
A woman who is trying to get pregnant, and she goes to an experimental kind of clinic, and she gets her baby. But what do you know? It's not quite right, and the baby is slightly more malicious than a mother might hope. It's a fairly well trodden tale, but it's pretty wild, pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Goes to some quite dark places. Got a hint of viciousness to it, which is kind of dark and edgy, and kind of just what you want out of this kind of film. It's an early appearance by Lisa Kudrow from Friends. So anyone who wants to be a completist of the you've got Jennifer Aniston in Leprechaun, and you've got Lisa Kudrow in Friends. And I just want to double check here. I think it is it's one of the first films photographed by Wally Pfister.
Yeah,
who went on to be Christopher Nolan's cinematographer. So
amazing. I love it.
It definitely looks good. It's
Apparently, it was described when it came out as a cross between Rosemary's Baby and The Fly. Love it.
Yeah, that's certainly a logline written by a marketing person. I'll tell you that. It's a Roger Corman produced killer baby movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great. And it's good, but it's no baby's blood.
Interesting. I really want to hear about this movie because I've just seen a clip of it and it looks incredible. I've not seen it. So let's quickly talk about Baby Blood from 1990.
Au début du monde, la Terre était un astre tout juste refroidi, couvert de gargouilles immondes. Toutes ces formes de vie se mirent à se reproduire, toutes sauf une. Moi à qui il ne manquait qu'une chose, la naissance.
It came out a year earlier, The Unborn. It's French language. It is about a circus performer, female circus performer, and she is impregnated by something, a creature crawling around in the kind of the countryside of France, and she is impregnated, and the baby, again, much like The Unborn, kind of takes on a kind of a sort of sentience of its own, and begins talking to her and turns her murderous and kind of bloodlusty in any way she can kind of protect her baby. And it's much like French Extreme would 20 years later. There's a certain kind of punchiness to kind of Euro horror that doesn't kind of hold back in terms of story or explicit depictions thereof. And yeah, this is a bloody wild guignol ride. It's tasteless in the extreme. It's it's not graphic in that kind of way. It's a fun, kind of rompy horror film. But it certainly goes there. It's very bloody, very crazy, got quite an apocalyptic kind of end. Again, it's another film where once you've seen it, you just want to tell people about it. The thing which people will really note about it is that in the US dub, so it's a French language film, but it was dubbed for an English language market, and the baby is voiced by Gary Oldman in the US dub. So
wow,
I guess the Gary Oldman of Tiptoes fame, rather than the kind of the Gary Oldman of Dracula and
brilliant.
And, State of Grace fame. I think he's kind of doing that bit. But it's just one of those films where people talk about it a lot, and it comes up a lot in these kind of conversations of culty things, and you think, oh yeah, is it really that kind of crazy and weird? It really is. It really delivers. It's so entertaining. It's so much fun. It's just so weird and wild and propulsive and just moves. And it's crazy baby talking to his mother and bloodlust, and it's kind of a little bit like a more fun Inside kind of way. She's a bit Beatrice Daly, and that kind of sort of just sort of crazy, edgy, I will do anything for this thing inside me kind of bent to it. And it would go very much with that French extreme thing, but a little bit lighter.
Oh, great. That sounds really fun. Baby Blood from 1990. It looks like...
So this rocks up on the Horror Channel every now and then. So you should watch the schedules. It has turned up. I think I watched it, maybe I might watch on YouTube or some other way a few years ago. And then I think that literally the next day I looked and it was, oh shit, it's on... It's on at 11 p.m. on the Horror Channel. So it is, it's around.
It's around, yeah, absolutely. And I think it looks like you can definitely get a Region 1 DVD or Blu-ray of it as well. So there you go. That sounds really fun. Baby Blood. Okay, what is next? So this might have a little crossover with your next season, actually. But I kind of wanted to kind of talk about them purely because, so this is Alien, kind of not of this earth kind of body horror. And I wanted to mention them probably because they're not quite as alien-y as, what you're probably going to talk about next year with Alien and even the Extra and things like that, which are very, very much extraterrestrials, and they're very much kind of alien things doing things to other people. And these two films are John McNaughton's The Borrower and Michael Laughlin's Strange Invaders. Interesting. Okay, let's start with The Borrower from 1991.
Thanks to Warlock and Hellraiser, the horror genre is hot again.
Isn't that something?
Now, from the critically acclaimed director of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, comes The Borrower, a new kind of horror film.
There ain't nobody gonna believe this.
An alien serial killer from another universe comes to Earth.
Weird. It's a monster.
And Ray Don Chong is the detective who must find him.
Oh my God.
Not since Reanimator has there been such a movie. The Borrower, the ultimate head trip.
Kind of cute.
So The Borrower is from 1991, and it's John McNaughton's, I say immediate follow-up to Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Oh.
It came out the year after Henry, but I mean, Henry was made about 4 years before it ended up being released. Yes. So I think Henry was made in 86, and The Borrower was made in 19, came out in 91. So it came out sort of just after. So it's a very weird disconnect going from this very, very intense sort of documentary, realistic portrait of, Henry Lee Lucas in all but name, going to a really gonzo, strange, comedic, kind of alien body swapping kind of film.
Right.
It's essentially an alien comes down to Earth and he needs to maintain his lifeblood because he doesn't adapt very well to this puny kind of Earth atmosphere. There's a kind of a scene very early on where he is exiled by his race, his alien race, and said, you're going to send you to Earth. He's like, oh shit, not that place. And obviously the rest of the universe doesn't look very favorably on Earth. And so when he gets down there, he doesn't really fit in. He can't really contain his kind of normal self. So he has to borrow the heads of people he meets. So essentially it's a lot of decapitations as he goes around Los Angeles, kind of pulling heads off hobos and ne'er-do-wells and cops and all manner of people. The first one he borrows the head from is Tom Towles from Henry, so Otis. He kind of is in it for the first. Then Antonio Fargas A bunch of people who recognise great character actors from the kind of the late 80s, 90s, and it's a in a weird way, it's kind of a rompy companion piece to something like Under the Skin.
Oh yeah,
you've got this alien who's kind of coming down and kind of looking around at Earth and looking around at humanity and thinking, who are these? What are they doing? Why are they doing? What do they do here? Why is this place like this? Why aren't they nice to people? Why are these people just sitting on the streets?
Right.
It's kind of got a bit more of that knockabout Brother from Another Planet, the John Sayles film, kind of feel to it. So it feels a little bit more kind of beatniky and punk rocky and stuff like that. So it has nowhere near the elegance of Under the Skin by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely has that, what an alien would look at when it looks at humanity and sees this, kind of shitty planet with people being dicks to each other, and kind of, is there any point in helping them? Quite nihilistic in its way. But the film itself is actually really fun, really weird, really wild. The kind of the makeup effects are sporadic, but when they come, they're worth the price of admission, absolutely for sure. Ray Don Chong from Commando is kind of the cop on the trail of this thing. This, they think, is a serial killer, obviously, and there's a scientist who's looking at the blood and realizes it's actually sort of from outer space. All those tropes are in there, and it's very much The Hidden and Dark Angel and Peacemaker and all those films that came out of aliens coming to Earth and cops on their trail. It was very much a thing. But this is, but just the humour and the kind of the weird swagger it's got. And Tom Towles, who is, he's ferocious and uncompromising in Henry, and, a real force to be reckoned with. And he's just this really weird physical comedian in this role. And it's kind of shows actually what a great actor he was. Because his role is, after he's killed off in the first 5 minutes, it's almost silent. He's ambling around LA looking for another body and kind of bumping into people, and he kind of talks with these kind of hobos and these people who run restaurants and things like that. And he's interacting with humanity, and just his physicality. It's a bit like Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black. When he kind of gets taken away. It's that so kind of has that kind of real physicality to that performance, and he looks kind of similar as well. But it's a real about turn for John McNaughton as a director, and he hasn't done much recently, but that and Mad Dog and Glory and Wild Things, he's a really great filmmaker. And this is just another weird, strange, eccentric little character study to his bow as well. So it's really, really good fun. Really good fun.
Nice. Okay, so that's The Borrower from 1991. Unfortunately, like so many of Giles's obscure picks, this movie doesn't seem to be available on DVD or Blu-ray currently, or streaming. But like so many of these, you can watch the whole thing online on YouTube. So check that out there. Okay, let's move on to the next movie in this little pairing then, Giles, which was Strange Invaders from 1983.
25 years ago, they came from another galaxy and joined the human race. Now, they're ready to leave, and some of us may be going with them.
Daddy, I don't want to go!
Strange Invaders.
It's a similar kind of story, but a much more kind of 50s, rooted in 50s kind of sci-fi, kind of conservative America, what's behind the kind of the curtains, kind of white picket fence kind of expose. So it's Paul and Matt in a small town America, and Nancy Allen's in it, and these aliens kind of come down, and they're essentially wearing human skin suits. So the body horror element of it is that they're these humans, but they'll kind of, at a point they'll kind of split down the middle, and you actually see they are aliens underneath. So it's not really alien invasions, but it's got a very much kind of a plasticky kind of reality to it. I'd say it's really kind of that kind of 1950s Norman Rockwell kind of expose of conservative values and things. That's at the heart of it. It's about like a Joe Dante film. It's about small town America and that invasion. It has those things to it. But again, it's a really quirky, eccentric take on that. Very much like a Joe Dante film would do. And it's this guy called Michael Laughlin who made another film called Dead Kids or Strange Behaviour. Very strange Australian kind of horror film around the same time, and this film was co-written by Bill Condon as well. Who went on to do Gods and Monsters and Candyman 2 and then Dreamgirls and what have you. So he wrote it as well. So it's got a real intelligence to its satire as well. And like I say, those two films are very much polar opposite, but they kind of very much about aliens inhabiting us in a kind of meaningful, satirical kind of way, and looking at, you know, what the humanity of that will kind of look like. So yeah, I think very different to a normal alien invasion kind of movie. They just happen to be, you know, they could be possession movies of another sort, I think. But but both, you know, really, really fun, energetic, and, you know, showcasing a kind of a physicality of that kind of, you know, practical kind of production kind of capability that is, again, it's just, it feels like magic from this vantage point, you know, kind of 40 years later. I just kind of love looking at the kind of the loving activity of those films. You know, films of ideas and you know, starring kind of these character actors doing these kind of sort of crazy kind of eccentric things. It's lovely.
Amazing. So that's Strange Invaders from 1983. Sadly, once again, not available to pick up anywhere on physical media currently, but hopefully you can find it somewhere online. Okay, Giles, what's next on your list?
So let's go a little bit more highbrow here.
Oh yeah.
Evolution from 2015.
Oh, what a film.
J'ai vu un mort. Dans la mer. Il avait une étoile sous le ventre. Une étoile de mer? Dans la mer, on croit voir beaucoup de choses. Pourquoi je suis malade? Parce que ton corps se transforme.
Ta mère m'a dit que tu dessinais.
What a film! I mean, the polar opposite of The Borrower. Absolutely, it's. I mean, this is, you know, proper art with a capital A. It's a wonderful filmmaker called Lucille Hadzihalilovic.
Yes.
There you go.
Well done.
I think I've got it.
Yeah.
Hadzihalilovic. The bane of podcasters everywhere, I think her name is. She is. Yeah. She's an amazing filmmaker. She's made very few films. I think she's done a lot of shorts and things like that. She was, for a while, she was the partner of Gaspar Noé. So she kind of comes out of a very, you know, kind of sort of intense, intelligent, kind of French art house genre kind of world. So she's very much mixing in that kind of circle. Her first film was called Innocence, and it was a very, very kind of feminist leaning kind of art house exploration of the, you know, the kind of commodification of femininity in fairy tales and things that had elements of Suspiria and you know, things like that. Girls kind of in this kind of school and what they were there for. Very, very minimalist, but, you know, kind of very, very kind of classy, elegant piece of cinema. Evolution is no less tricky and thorny. I mean, it's not an easy watch in that kind of way. It's very, very, it's fairly short. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's hugely visual. It's hugely about ideas. It's set on this kind of unnamed island, seemingly only populated by middle-aged women and young boys. And again, it's another kind of very stridently feminist take on, you know, what it means to not procreate in a sexual kind of way, but, you know, how life evolves. And it's in the title there, and it's, you know, it's kind of, you know, in a very cynical way, I think it's about the use of men and whether it's necessary at all, and whether they are literally used for their bodies. And there's obviously a lot to say about that. You know, kind of subtextually, not even subtextually, it's very, very textual. In that these women are kind of taking these boys, and you gradually find out what the rationale behind this is, and what the life cycle of this kind of island is, and what the purpose is. And there's a lot of imagery to do with you know, starfish and kind of creatures sort of beneath the sea, and how that kind of ecosphere kind of works, and how that's, you know, the world's kind of going back to a very, very naturalized kind of order. Humanity's kind of sort of reverting back to its natural state, and it's, you know, all these ideas kind of going on, is beautifully kind of lush visual kind of sort of palette that she's an astonishingly visual filmmaker. And yeah, it's not the most wild of the body horror things I think we're doing, but it's sort of one of the most potent. It really is just it's really, really eerie. I mean, again, I mean, you know, I think it's 15 rated, so in terms of graphicness, it's not there at all, but in terms of how unsettling and unnerving and genuinely horrifying it is, it really commits to this kind of very, very simple idea and really pushes it kind of as far as it can go. And it's a beautiful film, and it ends on a really kind of eerie, I'm not going to say apocalyptic note, but it kind of suddenly opens, literally in the last few seconds, it opens up this other world, and you're like, oh, wow, where's this? You know, you kind of want to see where it's going to going, but you don't, because it kind of just beautifully kind of grace notes kind of what might actually be, you know, the purpose of what we've seen for the last 80 odd minutes. It's great. I mean, it's a quiet, sedate, you know, kind of film for, you know, watching probably on your own in enclosed space with the lights off, and really kind of, you know, kind of commit to it. But if you do, you'll be very, very, very rewarded.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's got that kind of quiet, creeping dread. I really loved it. That's Evolution from 2015. You can stream that for free on Amazon Prime, and I think it's available.
Well, I tell you what, I acquired this as well in my older life. So I used to work for Metrodome, a company called Metrodome in the UK, and this is one of the last things I ever bought. So I was very proud to have sort of picked this up. Yeah, it was released theatrically, I think, briefly. So, you know, I luckily managed to see it, you know, on a very big screen. It's a proper cinematic film. It really is. You know, it's a proper filmmaker making a kind of a piece of art. It's but yeah, track it down if you can.
It really is beautiful. Yeah. Evolution then. That's a bit more of a highbrow choice, that one. Interesting.
A bit more of a highbrow choice. And in a similar vein, I think, you know, it would go well with another film I think we probably want to talk about, which is Border, which I think is probably a film that a lot of people have seen.
So good. Let's talk about Border from 2018.
Vad fick vi det där?
Det här? Vem är jag?
You know, it is about, I mean, obviously Border itself is to be as spoiler-free as possible. It is about gender dynamics and the evolution of bodies to accommodate, you know, the modern world and all that entails, let's say. Evolution does it with subtlety and grace and poise and beauty. Border is a very beautiful film. I mean, it's astonishingly beautiful at points. I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking in bits of it, but it is also wild as fuck. And there are images in there. There's a certain point in it about halfway through where I guarantee you will be slack-jawed with what happens.
Yeah,
gobsmacked. It's just such an astonishingly wild piece of storytelling, but completely organic. I mean, it's not doing it for shock tactics' sake. It's just like, oh wow, it's that, and you're like, oh, and it actually bizarrely becomes a very it's a conventional tale. It's actually something you've seen before in a certain way, but it's never been told quite like this.
It's kind of that moment as well goes from being sort of gobsmacking to quite disturbing to then actually quite emotional too. I mean, it's a really kind of beautiful story as well.
It's kind of got that it's in a slightly less traumatic way. It's kind of got the intensity of something like Zalowski's Possession or one of those kind of things. It's very, very kind of, it's trying to be transgressive, but it's also trying to just actually show you, you know, what's the logical extension of this thing. Well, it's, you know, and it kind of really goes with it. And it's, you know, I mean, the filmmaker, Ali Abbas, his previous film was a film called Shelley, which is a kind of a very Bergman-esque take on Rosemary's Baby. Very small chamber piece, but no less potent and powerful. He's obviously very into, you know, again, the ecology of what's going on around the characters and how that informs, you know, these puny little humans who really aren't, you know, kind of able to really cope with actually what's out there in nature and the forces sort of all around us. You know, he's very interested in pushing that to a certain degree where it really becomes, yeah, like you say, there's a fulcrum between incredibly disturbing and unsettling, but also kind of overwhelming in its beauty, in a kind of way. So he really is doing something really interesting. So yeah, I'll be interested. I mean, his new film is a bit of a departure from the fantastical. It's to do with things like religious zealotism and kind of the extremes to which someone might go for their beliefs and things like that. And it's, I'm assuming again, a very button pushing kind of portrait of one person's, you know, kind of drive to go to a certain place and beyond. So yeah, he's a really, really astonishing filmmaker who really there isn't anyone making films like him, I don't think.
No, absolutely.
In the world right at the moment.
It's really something else. So that's Border from 2019. You can get that on Blu-ray, and it's definitely worth it. It's worth a purchase.
Yeah, so as I say, those two films, they're much less about the orgiastic kind of effects bonanzas that kind of Cronenberg and their ilk are doing, but they are about it's kind of much more kind of a naturalistic kind of what could the body be, all the differences of humanoids, I guess, in that kind of way. But they're for the more adventurous viewer, they're definitely with if you like the stuff you've been talking about this whole series, you'll absolutely kind of get a whole lot out of those.
Definitely. All right, we're done well. We're rattling through this list.
Are we rattling through? Oh, good.
We're doing very well.
Lovely.
What's next?
Let's slow down a bit. Let's break. No. So yeah, the next couple are they're transformation movies. So they are, body horror. I mean, what are werewolves? Are werewolves body horror? They're kind of body horror.
Basically, everything is body horror.
They're everything. I mean, that kind of, the transforming of humans into something else is obviously a very, kind of visceral kind of component of the horror genre. And, kind of werewolves are arguably a kind of a body horror-ish kind of thing. I'm not going to do werewolf films necessarily here, but there are two films where the crux of them are a human protagonist transforming into something, by virtue of their lineage or by virtue of, what they want to do to themselves. And those two films are Paul Schrader's remake of Cat People and Ken Russell's Altered States, both of which share an outrageous, presumably cocaine-fueled development process, because the just the wildness and the absolute stark raving insanity that kind of just sort of fuels these two narratives. I mean, they are quintessentially none more 80s in their kind of sort of the visuals and the wildness, and the made by two filmmakers who I think that's fair to say are not demure about kind of coming forward and giving you what they wanted on screen. You got Ken Russell on one hand and Paul Schrader, sort of two of the biggest personalities of kind of sort of 80s, 70s, 80s film.
Absolutely. So should we begin with, let's talk about Cat People first then, from 1982.
What did they tell you about me?
I knew I had a brother, but I was only 4. I used to fantasize about you when I was in the orphanage.
Yes, I had the same dreams.
See these eyes so green, I can stare.
I didn't think you were ready, but you are.
It couldn't really be more different to the Val Lewton original.
No.
It is essentially a similar story of a woman who kind of discovers that, somewhere in her lineage is an ancient race of cat people. I mean, that's essentially the story there. It's kind of gothic-y fairy tale in the original film, and here done much more like a kind of gaudy, Jodorowsky-esque kind of sort of art exploration of, I'm going to say it's a very misplaced portrait of femininity from Paul Schrader and Alan Ormsby, the kind of Bob Clark's writer on Children Don't Play with Dead Things and Deranged and all these kind of things. They're coming together. Jerry Bruckheimer produced it. And so, it's not a feminist piece at all, but it is very interestingly putting Natasha Kinski right front and center. It's about her, problematic and troubling as a lot of it may be. It's a fascinating kind of character piece of, an actress, I think, who comes with a lot of baggage, the personality, filmmakers who come with a lot of baggage, and it kind of just collides in this kind of weird pop art, kind of fantasia-infused kind of, it is a fairy tale. I mean, it's a, boy meets girl, girls into cat, turns into cat and kills boy. It's, it's as old as the hills, but it's just wild, man. It's just wild. The stuff that kind of the commitment to going full perverse with the scenario is quite something. Made all the weirder, of course, by the fact it's John Hurd, the dad from Home Alone, is kind of the love interest in it as well, which is it was very strange when I first saw it, because I'd seen Home Alone much earlier, and then getting my head around that was always kind of strange. Great cast. It's John Hurd, it's Natasha Kinski, it's Ed Begley Jr., who has one of the most amazing effect sequences in the film. It's a real powerhouse of that. I guess if it was French, they call it Cinema du Look, the kind of the Besson kind of Subway, Betty Blue, Nikita kind of, it's the American version of that. It's all style, it's all substance, it's all Giorgio Moroder score, and it's David Bowie singing, and the visual, the palette, it looks like a kind of a Jodorowsky kind of fever dream, slow pans over deserts and enormous landscapes and things like that. It's just everything is big and everything is bold and everything is extravagant, probably for no reason. It doesn't need to be. Yeah. Like I said, it's the absolute antithesis of the quiet suggestiveness of Jacques Tourneur and Val Lewton.
Yeah.
You couldn't be more different. But it makes for a very of its period evocation of that particular story. And like I say, it looks wonderful. I mean, it really looks wonderful. It's a real piece of cinema, to watch. So yeah, I watched it again fairly recently, not having watched it for quite a while, and I was kind of taken with the absolute absurdity of it. Yeah. But it's compelling. It's really compelling. Very troubling and problematic in certain areas. Yeah. I mean, that's a given going in. It certainly has not aged well in terms of its sexual politics. Absolutely. I mean, I'm assuming it didn't age well at the time.
Yes.
But like I say, it's three kind of mercurial male creative forces coming together. I don't think it was ever going to be a Jane Campion film.
No, quite. So there you go. So that is Paul Schrader's Cat People, not to be confused with Val Lewton's Cat People. This one is from 1982. You can rent that online on streaming platforms. You can also pick up a nice collector's region dual format Blu-ray DVD as well. It's well worth checking out. Giles, let's talk next about Ken Russell's Altered States.
In the basement of one of the country's leading medical schools, Dr. Edward Jessup, candidate for a Nobel Prize, is conducting the most dangerous experiment in the history of science. And the subject of the experiment is himself.
Ask him what kind of an experience I can expect.
Giles, I've had a lot of people throughout the course of this series ask me, are you going to cover or are you going to mention Ken Russell's Altered States? So we had to give it a mention in this list. I didn't get time to cover it in depth in the series, but this film has so many fans. There's a lot of love for this film.
And with good reason. I watched it very young. I watched it when I was about 15 or 16, and I didn't get it. I mean, it's a grown-up film. It's a really grown-up film. Cat People, it's got crazy cat ladies and arms being ripped off, and you get that. But this Altered States is a real theatrical, and I mean that in a kind of a literate performance. It's very enclosed. There are certain scenes of kind of creatures running about the streets at night, kind of rampaging, but it's much more about much more like The Fly.
Yeah,
in that respect, it's a bit more a chamber piece, and it's about a man played by William Hurt, who is essentially trying to revert to man's primal state, kind of pre-evolution. That's his thing. He kind of he assumes that to progress as humanity, you need to kind of revert back to what we were pre-human. It's kind of this weird experiment, and he kind of gets himself in immersion tanks and sensory deprivation kind of tanks, and maybe some psychedelics as well. And he kind of puts himself through these extremes of scientific research, which seems incredibly unethical and unwise, but he does find that pathway deep within the recesses of his brain to kind of reverting back to his pre-evolutionary state.
Yes.
And it's kind of pulpy in that way, but the way it's presented, it's written by Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote Network and The Hospital. He's a very, very, he's a big brain. He hated this film, absolutely hated it. I mean, Ken Russell kind of went on and just did his own thing, and apparently he loathed it. And you can kind of see why, because it's a Ken Russell film. Yeah. It's not a Paddy Chayefsky film. It's a Ken Russell drug-fueled fever dream, operatic to the nth degree. Yeah,
bonkers.
It's big and crazy and bold. William Hurt and Blair Brown, who played the kind of the couple, very sort of hippy dippy, post 60s kind of intellectual types, and their relationship is very much the focus of the film, and there's a lot about the gender politics of the time as well, and plus the mad scientist stuff, and it's a real experience as a film.
Yeah,
it's and it does fulfill its brief as a kind of a creature feature again as well. There are transformations. There is a creature, there's rampaging, there's stuff like that. But it's done much more conceptually, I think, than a traditional kind of transformation film. The effects are very much of its time, very much flashy lights and kind of post 2001 Douglas Trumbull kind of style light shows and things. It's all very much in that realm. It's kind of it's a trip in that kind of way. I think it's very much evoking 2001 rather than kind of Universal monsters for sure.
Definitely.
But again, that's another one I watched recently, and I think you have to be grown up to appreciate it, because it is kind of tackling, I wouldn't say it tackles what it is to be alive, and it's not deep and meaningful in that kind of way, but it is a very grown up view of what it takes to kind of commit to your job and commit to what you're doing and follow through on these things at the expense of everything else, and tackles those kind of questions in a kind of a really bold and unique way. So it is fun. It delivers on the kind of the thrills of a genre film, but it's also a kind of a very grown up adult psychodrama as well.
Yes.
In the kind of the way that kind of later Cronenberg films are much more grown up than maybe Scanners and The Fly and things like that.
Exactly.
It shares that kind of intelligentsia as well, which I guess comes from the Chayefsky original template, but it's got that kind of Russell lunacy to it, which kind of has endeared us to everything from The Devils to Gothic to and
exactly.
beyond.
That's it. I think you've got to check out Altered States if you enjoy that other stuff like Gothic, like The Devils. It's quintessential Ken Russell. So that's Altered States from 1980. You can rent that online. You can also pick up a beautiful Blu-ray for that as well. So it's definitely worth checking out. Okay, next on the list, Giles, we're near the end now. Now this movie, along with Altered States, is another one that so many people asked to have mentioned. This is a movie starring Rock Hudson from 1966 called Seconds.
Bizarre. Terrifying. Rock Hudson, in an astonishing change of pace, stars in Seconds.
Do you know, I'm gutted because I really wanted to try and watch this before our discussion, but I just didn't have time. But I've never seen this film, and so many people have recommended it to me and told me that I would love it.
I mean, do you know what? It's definitely it's body horror.
Yeah,
it is body horror in the very kind of realistic. It's not realistic. It's crazy kind of mad scientists at its core, but it's a real world version of it. The nearest kind of film you would kind of compare it to nowadays for accessibility is kind of like Get Out.
Yeah, okay.
If that's a body horror film, then Seconds is a body horror film. And again, it's less about the horror of what your body can have done to it, more than who owns your body, who owns your consciousness, who owns your consent, and the kind of a commodification of you as a soul, brain, but all that kind of stuff. It's very much of a piece with Frankenheimer's Manchurian Candidate, and those kind of 60s paranoia conspiracy thrillers as well. It's all of a piece with that, but it has this kind of very hard sci-fi bent to it. Very, very it's hard sci-fi. It's not kind of crazy fantastical sci-fi. All feels like it could happen. And essentially, Rock Hudson plays this guy. Actually, it's not even Rock Hudson at the beginning. It's a man who is very unhappy with his life. He's aging. He's stuck in his ways, and he gets this opportunity to maybe change that. And it's not cosmetic surgery. It's not therapy. It's something else. And essentially, he is transformed by whatever process this is into Rock Hudson. He becomes the perfect man. He becomes the handsome, gregarious, charmed life man. And it's not enough, but what can he do? He's fucked. And it's that kind of, and it becomes, that's the start, and it becomes this kind of slow descent into paranoia. Is it madness? Is it really something, what's actually going on? Is there anything more sinister behind it? And it shares with things like, Soylent Green and Logan's Run, and those kind of very dystopian sci-fi. Those are much more extreme in that kind of way, but it has that kind of tendency. It's between that and the paranoia Cold War paranoia of, Parallax View and Manchurian Candidate as well. It exists within that kind of realm. And it's Frankenheimer. It's brilliantly made. It's wonderfully performed. It's so smart, so intelligent, genuinely unnerving when by the time it reaches a conclusion, which I'm not going to go into any here, but it's a devastating film. Not because of how graphic it is, but just in terms of its ideas, in terms of its views on humanity. And it's as frightening as any traditional quote-unquote body horror film that I guess you would have covered here. It's, dude, if you've got 2 hours tonight, do it as quickly as you can. It'll be one of the greatest discoveries of this year for you.
I love it. Sure. I can't wait. I'm going to check it out. So that's Seconds from 1966, starring Rock Hudson. Looks like you can rent that on all the usual streaming places, and you can.
Eureka have got a beautiful Blu-ray of it as well. Yeah. So if you want to fork out, a couple of notes for that, it's very, very, very well worth it.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. Amazing. All right, great. Well, that's a good recommendation. All right, and what's next?
Well, I think finally, with 2 films I think you wanted to kind of talk about, a filmmaker who I don't think we've talked about at all on the podcast, and who's made, he's actually made 3 films, one of which I love, and I'm very aware that no one else does in the world, but that's fine. But his first 2 films are slightly more palatable to the general populace, and this is Nicolas Pesce, and it's his films Eyes of My Mother and Piercing.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what? Yeah, I had this sudden realisation of like, oh my God, I cannot believe I've not covered this director so far this series, because I love his work, and I think Eyes of My Mother and Piercing so perfectly fit this bill, right?
I think they're really. He's a really interesting filmmaker. The other film he's obviously made is the Grudge remake, reboot, sequel,
I've not seen
whatever you want to do. Which a lot of people don't like. I actually think it's really good, and I genuinely mean that. I don't mean that in a kind of ironic kind of
so bad it's good.
Judge Dredd's good.
Yeah.
No, I think it's genuine. I think it's genuinely the most odd, strange, eccentric feeling of the American remakes of The Grudge. It feels the most like a non-US horror film. Actually feels like an Italian horror film. It feels Fulci-esque. It feels dark and decrepit and beige and nicotine stained and kind of unwieldy in which way it goes, and it flips back through time. And it's just got a real fetid kind of quality to it. And it's no surprise, because if you've seen Eyes of My Mother and Piercing, that's his thing. He's got a really unsettling vibe to him, a bit like Ari Aster has. Not like Ari Aster himself. Harry Aster has that. That's his feeling of really kind of cruel, harsh, nasty humanity buffeting up against genre tropes. Nicolas Pesce has that kind of a diet version of that. So everything feels quite harsh. It feels quite brutal. The worlds and the characters he lives in and works with are not particularly warm. They're very identifiable. They're not kind of stark and chilly like Bergman or Tarkovsky. They're much more relatable. But things that happen, it's a dark world, and bad things happen, and there's not much levity. And even something like Piercing, which is a bit more poppy and kind of sort of, let's say, fun and propulsive than Eyes of My Mother, which is a very dark, terrifying, and slow descent into. Eyes of My Mother is a bit more like May.
Yes.
Lucky Mickey's May. It's that kind of thing where it's this girl who witnesses her mother's death, and then it kind of flashes back through various time periods. It's black and white. It's very, very stylized. But by the end of the film, you kind of realise you've been watching this portrait of this girl slowly degenerating mentally into something very dark and uncompromising. And it's and Piercing is, like I say, a much more buoyant kind of fun. Feels much more like a kind of post-giallo Italian poppy. It feels. It's got Morricone and Stelvio Cipriani and everyone plastered all over the soundtrack. The whole thing is infused with Italian horror scores, so it gives it a real identity. But the story for Piercing is actually based on a novel by the guy who wrote Audition.
Yes.
So the Japanese author of Audition. So you can fit. It has that kind of. Well, it sort of feels fun and fresh, and like this portrait of this guy who's got a unhappy marriage, and he's going to go on a work trip, and then, oh my God, he's actually going to kill a prostitute. Oh, and you're like, where the hell is this?
And that's just the setup.
And you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, where's this going? And then is his wife? What? And you're like, you don't quite know where it's going, and then it becomes obviously much more noirish than that, and it's very much not about a horrible man going to do horrible things, but a man who's got himself into way too much trouble, and really doesn't know what he's doing. And it just kind of plays that. He's obviously got, like Ari Aster, a very cynical view of humanity and a very cynical view of what people are willing to do to each other. And certainly the visuals in Eyes of My Mother and Piercing, you know, they're not bloodbaths by any imagination, but there are some very stark, brutal imagery, kind of just punching your guts every few kind of scenes, and it's just memorable images and things that really make you wince. With kind of like, it's unpleasant to watch, right? Not in a graphic way, but just in an emotional way.
Absolutely.
You know?
And actually, Audition is such a perfect comparison, really. I was even going to mention Audition with Eyes of My Mother too. That feeling of that main character, this kind of seemingly quite timid, sad girl who then actually becomes more and more sort of dangerous.
But you never know.
You never know. Absolutely. It is.
I think it's why it's a very simple view of humanity, because the villains are not always the ones you expect them to be.
Yes.
And the villains are not always the ones that are actually going to be able to fulfill their dark destinies or anything like that. It's often other people are just as, you know, conniving and willful and impetuous as everyone else. And
indeed,
you know, there's always a sting in that tail, you know.
So there you go. Incredible double bill that is. Eyes of My Mother and Piercing. I mean, you can buy both, I believe, on Blu-ray, and I think so. You can stream them and rent them as well. They're very, you know.
Eyes of My Mother was actually, like Evolution, another of my last pickups.
No way! Wow.
So I do have a nice affinity for Nicolas Pesce. Yeah, I'm a big fan of him. Again, he's one of those filmmakers who is not for everyone. You know, I think both those films are incredibly divisive because they are not easy watches in terms of how they present their stories. Totally. I think, you know, they're not going to be the most graphic films you see in any of this list at all, but they linger with you, and there's a really unsettling view of humanity there, which is pretty stark and uncompromising and uncomfortable in the best kind of way.
Completely agree. Well, there you go. That's our list, isn't it?
That's it. I think that's it.
Oh, Giles, that was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for that. Before we finish, I'm going to quickly run through your whole list one more time, just so that everyone has got those recommendations down. So let's begin at the top. We started with medical malpractice body horrors. That was Body Parts from 1991 and Splice from 2009. Then we talked about Frankensteinian body horror, The Vindicator from 1986 and Frankenstein Unbound from 1990. Then we talked about a couple of shorts, body horror shorts, The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes from 1971 and Z is for Zygote from 2014. A couple of kind of crazy, schlocky, sort of B-movie-esque type fun from the late 80s and early 90s. We had Curse 2, The Bite from 1989, Leviathan from 1989 and Ricky-O, The Story of Ricky from 1991. Then we had a couple of Frank Henenlotter classics from the 80s, Basket Case from 1982, Brain Damage from 1988, a couple of pregnancy body horrors, Baby Blood from 1990 and The Unborn from 1991. Then you mentioned a couple of sort of alien sci-fi body horrors, The Borrower from 1991 and Strange Invaders from 1983. A couple of kind of crazy cosmic out there transformation body horrors, Altered States by Ken Russell from 1980 and Paul Schrader's Cat People from 1982. Then there was like a handful of kind of critically acclaimed, kind of more art house body horrors from recent years by sort of European filmmakers. So we had Evolution from 2015, Border from 2018, The Eyes of My Mother from 2016, and Piercing from 2018. And then last but not least, of course, we talked about this beloved classic, which I have still not yet seen, Seconds from 1966. That is an incredible list, Giles. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, if you had to recommend just one favourite from that whole list, what would it be?
Oh, Seconds. Seconds is plainly the best film on there, I think.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
As a film, I think Seconds is just the one that will linger with you. Seconds is the one that I could see ending up on most people's like best films list.
Yeah.
You know, certainly not. You know, I mean, God, if you want crazy, I mean, Story of Ricky is the craziest.
Okay.
Story of Ricky. If you just want to stick something on which is going to just pummel your face until you know. it just bleed with laughter is the story of Ricky. It's unlike anything you've really ever seen in Western cinema, but Seconds is genuinely the actual best film.
I love it. Amazing. Well, Giles, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Tell
welcome,
us,
dude.
Where can people find, if they want to come find you and get more recommendations from you, can they find you anywhere out there on social media?
I'm on the Twitters.
Yeah.
I think it's GFD Edwards.
Lovely.
So I'm on there. I don't think I'm anywhere else.
You're in the discussion group sometimes as well, aren't you?
I'm in the discussion group, popping around.
Popping up. So excellent.
Maybe.
Giles, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome, man.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to this week's guest, Giles Edwards. I simply could not have done that without him. His fountain of knowledge of obscure body horror films was absolutely appreciated this week. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you can discover some hidden gems from those recommendations. Is there anything that we missed? Are there any other body horror movies that you would have liked to have heard get a mention? Please do get in touch with your feedback. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd and Instagram, and you can join the discussion group and discuss this week's episode or anything else horror related with fellow listeners. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and that can be found on Facebook. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, Libsyn and Spotify. And if you could spare a minute, I would be hugely grateful if you could drop us a little rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever other podcast app you use. It really helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, well, that's kind of it for body horror. But we have got a couple more weeks left to discuss some psychological horrors. Next week, well, I had to do it. Next week, we're finishing our deep dives of psychological horror with 2 final David Lynch films. Next week, I'm going to be joined by 2 different guests, Rob Watts and Ollie Charles, and we are going to be discussing 2 of his most baffling and fascinating works, Mulholland Drive from 2001 and Inland Empire from 2006. Good luck, everybody. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.